Hello, this is Craig Wesco recording for TCGplayer.com, and today we're going to be playing Black-White Tokens with Smuggler's Copter. Hopefully the sound is a little bit better than before. I get a new microphone, this sweet Corsair mic headset, and if the sound quality is better than before, let me know in the comments. So basically this is a typical Black-White Tokens build except for a few changes. One is instead of playing cards like Raise the Alarm and Spectral Procession, I'm choosing to go a little bit bigger and playing cards like Gideon, Ally of Zendikar, and Sorin, Solemn Visitor. Lingering Souls is still the main card. That's kind of the reason to play Black-White Tokens. And I also have cards like Blade Splicer and Bitter Blossom. The other thing that I'm doing, instead of playing Intangible Virtue, which just kind of makes your token draws better, I have Planeswalkers that can Anthem. So I can Ultimate Gideon, or I can +1 Sorin to pump on my guys to one bigger. Or I could just use Smuggler's Copter, which essentially amounts to a comparable amount of damage in most cases. So let's say instead of the line of Virtue into Lingering Souls into Flashback Lingering Souls, I'm going Copter into Lingering Souls into Flashback Lingering Souls. So when I play the first Lingering Souls, instead of attacking for 0, I attack for 3. And then when I flash it back the next turn, instead of attacking for 4 with the 2 tokens off of Intangible Virtue, I'm attacking for 5 off of the Copter and the 2 Souls tokens. So that's 8 damage instead of 4. And then the next turn, I can attack for, 6? So that's 3 plus 5 plus 6 is 14 damage. Whereas with the Virtue Souls Flashback plan, it is 0, then 4, then 8, which is 12. So in terms of curving out, playing a Copter instead of a Virtue on turn 2 is actually a faster, more aggressive draw. And the Copter works great with the Lingering Souls anyway, because they're all flying, and any one spirit can crew the Copter immediately. And it also works well with Bitter Blossom, because you, let's say, make a Bitter Blossom token on your upkeep and then use it to crew the Copter and attack. So that's kind of a good thing. And Blade Splicer also works great because let's say you go turn 2 Copter, turn 3 Blade Splicer. Well, you can just use the Splicer to crew the Copter and attack for 3 immediately, and you still have a 3/3 first striker back to block the Golem token. So that's a sweet interaction. Another one I like is you can play Gideon, make a token, crew the Copter. It's kind of something that we see a lot in Standard. We also have the sweet combination where we have Wrath of God and Damnation. So we can play a Smuggler's Copter and then play, say, a Liliana, and then we can like Damnation away their board if they do something to like progress their board to deal with our stuff. Or we could play like a Lingering Souls and do some chump blocking. And we still have a Copter after we Wrath. So our Copter survives Wrath, our Planeswalkers survive Wrath, and we have 10 Planeswalkers. Lingering Souls you can flash back after a Wrath. Bitter Blossom keeps making tokens after a Wrath. Our Shambling Vent survives Wrath. So literally all of our threats survive Wraths, which is why we can run 3 main. We have 2 more on the sideboard. So that's kind of an interesting element that most Black-White Tokens decks can't do, because if you play Spectral Procession and then you Wrath, it's like, well, you haven't really made any headway. You just kind of Wrathed your own board. Whereas in this deck, we keep sort of applying pressure and advancing our board, where a Wrath doesn't really affect us that bad. So we can easily recover from our own Wrath. So we can kind of be a token deck that curves out with like Inquisition into Copter, into Lingering Souls, into Planeswalker, something like that. Or we can be sort of a more mid-rangey control deck where we're going like Thoughtseize into Bitter Blossom, into Liliana, into like Wrath, something like that. And the fact that we have 6 hand disruption spells and a 7th in the sideboard gives us a lot of play against pretty much everybody, because everybody has cards to tear out of their hand, and then we have these kind of generically useful, very flexible ways to progress our board. So if the opponent has a threat, we can have them sack it with Liliana. If they don't, then we could start plussing it to rip apart their hand and set up an ultimate. Similar with Gideon, if we need a blocker, we just make a token. If we need to clock the opponent, we start attacking for 5. Sorin can gain us life if we're on the back foot, or it can just make tokens to give us more of a board presence, or it can anthem our team to accelerate our clock, say if we're trying to kill the opponent before they can reassemble their combo. So we can just do a lot of stuff, and we can grind hard too with all these planeswalkers and these lingering souls, and the Smuggler's Copter allows us to loot away all of our discard spells late in the game, any excess lands we might have. Some matchups, these Wrath of Gods are pretty mediocre, so we can pitch extra ones of those. Maybe we dealt ourselves too much damage with our fetch lands and our Thoughtseize and our Bitter Blossom, and we're not drawing a Sorin, so maybe we just like don't want to cast the second Bitter Blossom, so we just can pitch that to a Smuggler's Copter. There's just a lot of stuff that this deck can do. And now another card that we get is Concealed Courtyard, which is a pretty obvious gain, but it does mean that we can take less damage from our mana. So it means like turn 1 Inquisition can be much less painful against a lot of decks. So another thing we can do if dealing ourselves damage is an issue is we have these timely reinforcements, which work excellently with Smuggler's Copter, because you go turn 2 Smuggler's Copter, and the opponent's like, okay, great, play more creatures, attack you, whatever. Even if they just have 1 creature out, then we just play timely, and we can immediately attack with the Smuggler's Copter by tapping one of the soldier tokens made off the timely. But even if the opponent just has 1 creature, we still get the 3 tokens because Copter doesn't count as a creature. So that's kind of a neat interaction. If the tournament were tomorrow, I'd probably play a 3rd timely, but I wanted to fit the 4th Rest in Peace in just because some matchups, especially Dredge, you just have to have it. I'm not sure what else to cut. I'm really hesitant to cut the Elspeth because it's so good against mid-range decks, but it might be the place to cut. So timely, great against burn decks, against any sort of aggressive deck with creatures where our life total is an issue. The Fulminators and the Tech Edge come in against any sort of like Tron deck or Valakut deck. Anytime where just disrupting their mana is plan A. We have 4 Ghost Quarters and a Tech Edge main, so that gives us 8 land destruction spells, which is usually enough to draw like 2 pieces, which is enough to disrupt them. So we have all the hand disruption, the mana disruption, and then we just need, some clock, like a Lingering Souls, a Gideon, something like that to seal the deal. And we have 2 more Wraths. Flaying Tendrils, extra good against like Elves, a deck where we might not have a turn 4. So, and other times, if it's like Affinity, then we want to kill off their Etch Champion. So we want something like Wrath of God or Damnation just to wipe the board. We don't run Stony Silence anywhere in the 75, partly because we have Copter, but mainly because I think that the plan of just wrathing them is just as effective. Like we have them dealt with in the air between our Lingering Souls, Bitter Blossom, Smuggler's Copter, so they're not just going to beat us down with a bunch of like Signal Pest, Vault Scourge type draws. So they're going to have to get to like an Etch Champion to beat us. And we have the 4 Copters and the 2 Blade Splicers as colorless answers, but then we also have 3 Wraths main, 2 sideboard. And so I feel like we kind of have most of the angles covered in Affinity, that we don't need specific hate like Stony in our sideboard. And with Tron, we don't need the Stony because we have 8 land destruction spells. So in both those matchups, we're just kind of taking a slightly different line that doesn't require having Stony. It's an experiment. I'm not 100% sold that we shouldn't have Stony in our sideboard, but that's my reasoning. Well, with Disenchant, good against Affinity, but also especially good against Leyline of Sanctity, because that card's especially good against us. We have all this hand disruption, we have Liliana to target the opponent. We just really want an answer to that card. So if we played against like a Boggle deck, for instance, we basically have no way to stop them if they have Leyline. And so if we can deal with the Leyline, then suddenly Liliana becomes our best card against them instead of essentially a dead card. And it just turns on all our discard spells, which makes us even better against them. So Disenchant has some utility, and it also is just good against like Pyromancer's Ascension and Snaring Bridge against Lantern, stuff like that. And then the Rest in Peace is mainly for Dredge, but also for any sort of other graveyard deck. I bring in some copies against like Tarmogoyf type decks, and also against like Delve type decks. And then Elspeth is just our trump for the grindy matchups. So any sort of Jund matchup or Jeskai matchup, any matchup that goes long, just Elspeth kind of cleans up. And then Duress is just another sort of discard spell against a lot of decks. We want to board out Thoughtseize against Burn, but we don't mind another discard spell. Great against like control decks and combo decks. So that's basically the deck. It's a variant on black-white tokens. It's kind of a morphing of the black-white Planeswalker control deck that I wrote about a few months ago with black-white tokens, a deck that I've been playing for a long time. And Smuggler's Copter, kind of the new hotness. And then also Concealed Courtyard as a new addition to the deck. But the deck's been sweet. It's been performing pretty well in testing. And I think if there were a tournament tomorrow, it would be one of my top contenders. So it's definitely under the radar and one of the best Smuggler's Copters deck in Modern. So let's see how it does.